So the next section is their cash flow section. This is going to be focusing on their income sources and expenditures. So it's going to take careful tracking of all the inflows and outflows of cash. First, we start with a graphical view of the cash that's needed versus available. So this is really a graphical view of what we can see on the numbers schedule for the cash flow illustration B7. So if we want more details, that's a good report to look. But this gives you a good overview. You can see their income sources versus their expenses over the years. So we can say we have several years where there is a gap between what they have available, especially once they get into retirement and are receiving some green, which is pension and Social Security income, and no longer earning income. And that gap would have to be filled with distributions from assets, which we're not really looking at this point. We're just looking at scheduled income sources versus expenses. The next report looks at sources of funds. So where we saw gaps on the previous page, this is going to show the distributions that the program's going to be making to fill that gap. So those years where we had gaps between our income needed and income available, it's going to take distributions you can see in blue here from investment accounts, or from yellow are going to be distributions from retirement accounts. So we can see they still have investment money, but the program's going to be starting to take some RMDs, and then once they run out of their non-qualified investment type money, it's going to start taking distributions from their retirement accounts. Okay, and then the next report we have here, still continuing with the set of graphs, is the annual expense graph. This just gives you a breakdown of what makes up their annual expenses each year of the projection. So we can see, for example, at this point we have a large debt payoff, so it's probably a balloon payoff at something like a residence. Again, we can get to the more details to break down the numbers if we were to look at the annual expense illustration B8. So next we get into their current year cash flow. So this gives you a real careful, detailed view of their current year situation. It's going to line by line list every income and expense item for the current year only. So you can see their income sources, all of their expenditures, things like taxes, loan payments, insurance premiums, contributions to their assets, education fund deposits, contributions for charitable giving, property taxes, medical expenses, laundry list of budget items here. So in golden years, if they do have a cash flow surplus, that surplus would turn around and be reinvested. If they have a shortage, that shortage would get pulled from their assets in the current year, regardless of the retirement period. There is an option if you want it to behave a little bit more like easy money, which ignores pre-retirement cash flow. You can choose to do that. That is under the surplus allocation tab. Golden years only, you'll notice, ignore pre-retirement cash flow shortages and surpluses. People don't typically use this function, but you can if you want that pre-retirement period to ignore any cash flow shortages and surpluses. So the next report is that detailed cash flow illustration. So this is going to give us all the numbers behind what makes up their income sources and expenditures year by year, and determining if the client has a cash flow shortage or surplus. So in this case, they have surpluses for the first 3 years. And then we can see they have a small shortage and a little bit of surplus, and then the shortages get larger from there. And it looks like that's primarily because of a change in earned income. So probably individual 1 is retired, and then individual 2 is retired a few years later. Again, we can break that down out and find out exactly why by following that audit trail reference. So any shortages that you see here will get pulled from assets. If they have a shortage here, it doesn't mean that their assets are depleted. It just means that their income sources, their scheduled income sources, do not exceed their expenses. So their expenses are more than their income sources for that year. So the next report, these are going to really be supporting that B7 cash flow illustration. The annual expense illustration, we can see a breakdown of how their expenses change over time, how their earned income changes over time, pension and Social Security income that they're receiving, other income and expense detail, miscellaneous cash flow items from things like rental real estate. And then we get into financial goals, and financial goals are one-time special expenses that have been entered in a specific input for the program. If we look back here at our data entry and go to the financial goals section, you can see this is where the retirement trip and the sailboat have been entered into the system. If you do want the expense of the retirement trip and the sailboat in this case included as part of the expenses for the client in the future, you can check this box, include financial goals and retirement capital estimate. That means we'll see this inflated $15,000 come into the projection as an expense at age 61. If we did not check that box, it would still be highlighted on this goal funding financial goals report, but it wouldn't be an expense included in the retirement projection. So this goal funding report, if you do enter in any financial goals there, it will come up with the lump sum the clients would have to put away today to fund that goal, or if they were to make monthly deposits from now until that age of the goal, what kind of monthly deposit would be required. So we have just a couple basic education funding reports. There's 2 of them available in Golden Years. And this is just going to illustrate the education funding requirements, so you can see the college costs for each child that have been entered in the system for the years that they're occurring. Then the program will also help solve for shortage solutions in this case, so it will take a look at what kind of current funds they have available now, what kind of deposits they're currently making, and it will come up with the amount of additional funding that would be required. So if we take a look at what they have now, considering they have $25,500 saved and they're currently putting away $145 a month for education, it's going to say that they need to increase their contribution by $407 a month in order to completely fulfill their education funding requirements. If we move on to the next page, education funding sources, this is going to show how their current education funding is going to work. So you can see their education fund balance, so they indicated they had this $25,500 already set aside for college, and they're making that monthly contribution, so you can see how that annual addition occurs each year of the projection. The annual college costs are going to be factored in, and then we can see what's actually pulled from the education funds. So when those education costs start to incur for the children, the program's first going to pull from the funds available. After those funds have been depleted, it's going to start pulling from the parents' assets, or it's going to be an expense at least included for the parents' projection. If you have this box checked here, so if we look under dependents, this checkbox, deduct education expenses from savings and investments, if you have that box checked, any uncovered college costs will get passed on as an expense to the parents. If you do not have that box checked, you'll have the education funding illustrations, but that expense that we see here, this from assets column, would not be carried into the parents' expenses. So that covers our cash flow section.